Hello and welcome to this video of assessing a country as a production location. So in this video we're going to look at the different factors a business might consider when deciding whether a country is suitable as a production location. So in this video we're going to look at a number of factors that a business might consider when deciding whether we should make our products in a particular country. And these are the factors that we're going to go through. So let's start off with one of the most important ones, the costs of production. So in highly competitive mass markets, having low costs of production will be a significant issue. This means that lots of low wage cost economies have seen foreign direct investment from firms taking advantage of this low labor cost. Other costs such as land might also be significantly cheaper in areas such as Eastern Europe when comparing that to the UK, for example. Here we can see the breakdown of a $100 Nike shoe in a shop. And we can see that the shop itself, the retailer, takes nearly half of the value. And then there is some profit that goes to Nike themselves. And then beyond that, we have a number of other costs. Important to note that nearly a fifth of the overall price is down to the costs of production. So if we're able to reduce these costs of production as Nike, then we can increase our profit on each shoe. The next factor we might consider is the quality of the labor force. So developed economies are normally seen to have highly skilled labor forces. So people with lots of qualifications, able to work with high-end technologies. But despite this, there's often a shortage of suitably skilled workers. And this can often be resolved by locating in other countries and utilizing the skills of the workers there. Quite often this will involve the training of workers to the required standard. Much FDI into developing economies is also to take advantage of cheap labor for lower skilled manufacturing jobs. When we look at the cost of labor in different countries, we can see quite significant differences. So just within Europe itself, we have quite a large variation. In this chart here, we can see that Sweden, in euros on average, the pay is about 40 euros per hour. Whereas at the other end of the scale, we have many countries in sort of Eastern Europe where the costs per hour are approximately a ninth of the costs of a worker in Sweden. So that's a massive cost saving. When we go globally, we can see even bigger trends. So if we look at the textile industry, making materials for clothing, in Switzerland we can see very high US dollar cost per hour of over $40, nearly $50 per hour. At the bottom end of the scale, countries like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Pakistan, Bangladesh, very, very cheap labor costs in these countries. Infrastructure is another important consideration. If I'm going to produce a country in a country, I need to be able to then distribute those products from the production location. I also need to be able to communicate with the manufacturer in that particular country. So communication infrastructure is also important. Many countries will locate their production within a trade bloc, such as the EU, NAFTA, and ASEAN, the Southeast Asian trade bloc. It allows easier access to those markets. I don't have to pay any export taxes. And so this increases the benefits of setting up production inside a trading bloc. Often foreign direct investment will be invested into countries that reside in a trade bloc. For example, Nissan said one of the main reasons they located in the UK originally was because the UK was a member of the EU. However, sometimes you can get access to a trade bloc without necessarily being a member. For example, Norway has a trade deal with the European Union. So we mentioned earlier that the UK has many car producing companies within it. And one of the reasons often given, and in particular from the reason given by the largest car producer, Nissan here in Sunderland, was that being part of the EU was an important factor. That means that any parts that come from other EU countries, there are no tariffs or taxes placed on that. And then when we export the cars back to Europe, again, there are no restrictions on that trade. Obviously, leaving the EU has an impact on that. Another thing to consider is whether there are any government incentives available. Often governments will provide grants if a business were to invest in a particular country. This could be because the government want jobs to be created in that country. Again, Nissan is a good example here. They were given a grant by the UK government to locate in Sunderland in North East England, where traditionally there is quite a lot of unemployment. It might also be the case that governments wish to gain knowledge from a business and hope to do so, or hope that local businesses will gain knowledge by that company locating in that country. Ease of doing business is also an important consideration. Again, excessive bureaucracy, lots of rules and regulations make it more difficult to do business, make it more difficult to produce products in that country. Often governments might change their stance with businesses. They might make it easier for a certain business to locate, whilst make it more difficult for another business that perhaps is a competitor to a local company. A good example of a country that's seen a lot of improvements recently is India. In terms of their ease of doing business ranking, they have seen significant improvements over the last few years, particularly with things like constructing buildings, setting up a business, enforcing contracts, although there are still some issues that need to be addressed and make business quite difficult to do in India still. Another thing to consider is the possibility of a joint venture. So sometimes a good way to overcome lots of local governmental issues is to partner with a domestic company. For example, BP partnered with Rosneft in Russia to take advantage of Rosneft's knowledge of the local business practices and perhaps gain preferential treatment from the government and authorities. If companies are unwilling to partner and the government are resistant to foreign businesses, operating in this market will make it less desirable as a production base. Political stability is another key factor. We want to locate ourselves in a politically stable country so that there is less instances of corruption, which particularly foreign businesses are likely to have to pay, a lot of bribes and quite susceptible to the negatives of corruption. And obviously the risk of war and so on makes it difficult to produce in that country. This chart here shows us some examples of rankings for political stability in 2016. At the top we can see countries like Denmark and New Zealand are considered particularly stable, whereas countries like Somalia and to a lesser extent Turkey less stable. Access to natural resources is obviously an important consideration when considering where to locate our business. Some countries have lots of natural resources, and so it's sensible to set up production in these in order to ensure a supply of these resources. This has led a lot of multinational companies moving into countries globally and having a significant influence on those countries. For example, BP has been operating in the Middle East for over 100 years. Ultimately, the key decision for businesses is what is going to make us the most profit. A business might well take into account all the previous factors discussed and decide whether this investment is likely to generate a significant acceptable return or the best return. This is a strategic decision, quite a big strategy a business is undertaking here. Heavy investment is required to move into new countries. And when a decision to proceed is underway, it is not easy to do and has large sunk costs. Location in foreign countries is often dynamic. A lot of these factors can change over time and so need to be carefully considered. However, the most important question in summary is what return will the business get on its investment? What is the return on investment in terms of a percentage going to be? How much money are we going to get back compared to the cost? So in this video, we've looked at a number of different factors a business might use to evaluate the suitability of a country as a production location. Ultimately, it might come down to which factors are the most important given the context of the business, given its experience, its finances, the nature of its products and services. As ever, context is key. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.